All right, welcome back. So the Centre for Development and Enterprise, an independent policy research and advocacy organisation, has released an unemployment report for South Africa. So in the report, 10 million and rising, the organisation argues that the crisis of unemployment, which it describes as the deepest in the world, has worsened because government has failed to address its underlying causes. So it says between 2008 and 2019, the number of people who want to work but cannot find it or having to give up rose to 6.5 million to 10.8 million. So every day, some 1,700 adults join the labour market and fewer than 500 of them find work. To discuss this, we're joined by the Executive Director of the Centre for Development and Enterprise, Anne Bernstein. Anne, thanks for your time this evening. So we're looking at 10 million and counting. Right?
I'm afraid so. It's a terrible number.
It sounds like a bloodbath. Talk to us about the research, the latest research that came up with these figures.
So our research is about what are the actual numbers, what are the causes for our terrible and deep unemployment crisis, and what should South Africa do about this. So it's 10.3 million and rising, and this is an unbelievable disaster for South Africa, for the individuals concerned and their families, for their communities, for the economy and for the country. And employment is a really important part of one's life. If you come out of generally a very bad school, maybe a community or family where nobody works, if you can get a job, you can learn new skills, you can build new networks, and you can get know-how on how the studio works or how the factory works. If you're unemployed, you don't get any of that. And so you become more and more unemployable. So employability creates more employability. And so we're saying that it's time for a completely new approach to how we deal with unemployment.
And that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about, Anne. You're also saying that South Africa's approach to employment/unemployment is not working. It needs to be overhauled completely. Talk to us about what needs to be done.
Well, there are two big areas of reform. We have to get growth going much faster. And we're proposing a number of reforms to do that, which are fundamental and which are difficult, politically difficult. But without faster growth, we have no hope. But even if we got faster growth, the growth that South Africa has through a history of bad policy choices makes employers less and less keen to employ people and especially unskilled younger people. So we subsidize machinery. We give subsidies to capital-intensive sectors in our economy, and we encourage that. And we're saying we should change that. We should give subsidies and encouragement to employ people. We do that through the employment tax incentive, which we support. We're saying it should apply to far more people and for a longer period. But there's more that we can do as well. We need to look at how small firms and new firms are disadvantaged by all the regulations in our economy, which are expensive, and by the way in which we manage the employer-employee relationship, which raises costs and makes employers less keen to hire people. So all of these things make our economy one where we create less and less jobs for unskilled people and where we're struggling to get growth going. And our approach up till now has been, let's have a job summit, let's fiddle at the edges, let's tweak things, but let's not deal with the fundamental issues. And we're saying it's not working. The unemployment situation is getting worse and worse. And we have to tackle the big reform issues to get growth and to get the labour market more conducive for unskilled people to get jobs.
I want to talk about policy very shortly, but I mean, the situation looks extremely dire for young people. We always hear government say that they're looking to create a certain number of jobs for young people, but the truth of the matter is that young people are still struggling. Let's talk about this latest report of yours and How dire is the situation for young people? Let's talk figures.
The situation for young people is even worse than the population as a whole. So over the last decade, some 2.2 million young people joined the labour force. During that period, over 500,000 young people lost their jobs. So we're just not keeping up at all. We have probably one of the highest unemployment rates for young people in the world, and this builds upon itself. So this is a terrible situation to be in, and we're saying it's time to take this crisis much more seriously. We don't want more words, we don't want more projects, we don't want more gestures.
Summits.
What we need is to say we have to turn this around. We have to get millions of people into work. Now, we can't do this overnight. It's too deep, it's too bad. But we can develop a reform strategy to tackle the big, difficult issues we need to tackle if we are going to make progress.
Is this a policy failure problem? You speak about having to introduce complete reform, but what would that entail? What do you suggest should happen in South Africa in detail, please?
Well, we're not saying complete reform. So when it comes to how do we get growth in South Africa, we all know that without electricity, secure, reliable electricity generation, you're not going to get increased investment, and you and I are not going to start a new factory. So we've got to get electricity generation. We've got to deal with our fiscal crisis, which is now holding back growth. And so we have to deal with the public sector wage, and we have to deal with the state-owned companies. We have to look at how we make this a much more competitive economy. We've come out of a terrible apartheid history, and we have to look at it sector by sector. What are the barriers to new firms and to smaller firms to get in to each sector of our economy? So we need a lot more competition. Now, the Competition Commission has been doing energetic work. They tend to concentrate much more on abuse by private firms, which they should do. But they don't look at state monopolies, which are terribly inefficient and a big drag on the economy. So there are a lot of things to do with the economy. We need a very different attitude to the role of competitive markets, the role of business, and the size of the state. We need to roll back an attack on property rights and a range of other things to get growth going. That's what investors are telling us. We also, I'm afraid, have to look at the labour market. And here we're not calling for wholesale reform. We're very conscious of the fact that for many workers in unions, they and their families are emerging out of poverty, and we need to think very hard about how we change our labour market. So we've carefully calibrated the kinds of reforms that we're calling for. We need to make sure that bargaining negotiations only affect the people involved in the negotiation and not the small firms and other firms that are not party to that negotiation.
All right.
So I know it's a lot of things, but we're saying you've got to do both. And this is tough, but without it, South Africa is not going to move the dial on unemployment.
And in fact, one of the things that you mentioned is the state-owned enterprises, how all of that needs to turn around. And what we do know is that, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa, that will seemingly top the agenda of his State of the Nation address. We'll give you a report on that very shortly. That was the Executive Director of the Centre for Development and Enterprise, Anne Bernstein. So.